My mind's eye perceives a man standing humbly before you, who remains relatively youthful in both constitution and demeanor. The calendar's eye, however, has its gaze fixed upon an opposing narrative, which counts said man amongst those listed on the old guard's roster. In fact, according to local legend, I graduated from Friends prior to the era of gainful employment. Ever a fan of legend, I decided to do a little research. As it turns out, I did not graduate from Friends. Instead, I matriculated at Regis, a Jesuit high school for Roman Catholic boys on the Upper East Side. Fun fact, both John Garnavikis and Tom O'Connell did as well. There I had the great fortune of being taught by Mr. John Connolly. Unlike one certain misguided legend, Mr. Connolly actually did graduate from Regis before serving as a member of its faculty for 52 years. Each occasion that I have to sit in this meeting house for these very commencement exercises, I am reminded of something that Mr. Connolly offered to my parents prior to my own graduation. He said, "What I appreciate the most about Denman is that he is childlike." After what I can only imagine must have been a somewhat confused and skeptical look from my parents, he continued, "Mind you, I did not say childish. I said childlike. And I sincerely hope that never changes." So, what then is childlike? At the time, Mr. Connolly was presumably referring to a sustained sense of wonder and its virtue. In order to verify this claim, one could certainly point to my wondering how it is in the 4 decades I have walked this temporal realm that the Knicks have never won a championship. But in all seriousness, let us deepen this investigation by recalling details from my own childhood. My mother tells me that shortly after I was born, my father took to calling me his little rabbi, his little priest. I say my mother tells me this because my father is generally suspicious of history. He's been known to dismiss many an account with a simple, "Well, I wasn't there." In any event, as a young man, my father had attended biblical college and been ordained a minister. He never practiced, though. He became a contractor instead, utilizing the trades that his grandfather had taught him. His terms of endearment then were undoubtedly part of a ritual that allowed him to live out his previous calling. I say all of that in the hopes of illuminating an episode I'm about to share. I was about 3 years old. Having finished my dinner, I asked to be excused from the table. Unbeknownst to my parents, I had a project to complete. I can remember going down the stairs to the basement, into my father's workspace, looking for suitable pieces of wood. I intended to build an airplane. I beamed with pride, having but glued 2 pieces together. It seemed an appropriate juncture to display my toy-making prowess, so I went back to my parents with the unfinished work in hand. Before I could even get the words out, I remember my father saying, "Kathy, do you see what the boy has there?" My mother responded, "Yes, Chesterfield, I see it." It was as if I, too, could hear the angelic hosts on high, proclaiming that Scripture had been fulfilled. They thought my airplane was a cross. I didn't have the heart to tell them otherwise. So a cross it was, and there it remained on a wall by the basement staircase. Although one could easily relegate this to an instance in which a child did not want to disappoint his parents, upon reflection, I suspect that something further happened. The symbolism here was bigger than me, bigger than my parents, and that mystery was not lost upon a developing mind. My love for my parents allowed me to embrace a transforming moment of possibility. It wasn't simply about me. Another way of speaking to this may have been encapsulated during a recent visit to Tibet House, a nearby cultural center founded at the request of the Dalai Lama. One of the meditations that evening focused on sound and deep listening techniques. Chimes, distortion, running water, and even passing cars from the street outside were all prospective paths towards stillness and a genuine acknowledgement of the present's worth. At some point during the course of this meditation, one of the teachers gently suggested that we listen not with our ears, but with our hearts. I think that was, to a certain extent, the end result of this moment of misunderstanding with my parents. And I would argue that this is also closer to the essence of what was not only my high school teacher's compliment, but his challenge. I am a born and raised New Yorker, a native Manhattanite. In other words, I'm on the endangered species list. All rarity and kidding aside, in my estimation, one of the many privileges that come with living in this city is access to an abundance of sacred spaces, this meeting house not being the least among them. Well, it suddenly occurred to me on a Sunday morning last month that I had not yet seen the Riverside Church. So, my significant other and I decided to gather there with the congregation for worship. I was utterly taken with the beauty of the architecture, the stained glasswork, the music, and the sermon by one Reverend Michael Livingston. Reverend Livingston told the tale of two little children, a brother and a sister, that went viral almost 20 years ago. The sister was suffering from a rare and fatal disease that left her in desperate need of a blood transfusion. Her brother was the only viable candidate, given that he had the necessary antibodies, having somehow survived the disease himself. Before simply moving ahead with the procedure, of course, the brother was asked first if he was willing. Taking the matter quite seriously, he reflected on it overnight before making his decision. He ultimately agreed, and all parties involved rushed to ensure that the sister would get her brother's donation in time. As he was lying next to his sister in the hospital, the brother turned to the attending doctor and asked, "How long do I have before I die?" The boy bravely consented out of love for the sake of his sister. Now, it doesn't matter that all of this actually came from the 1993 bestseller, Chicken Soup for the Soul, a collection of inspirational stories that a couple of motivational speakers compiled from interactions with their audience members. What matters is the telling of how this boy loved. The manner was strong, trusting, unconditional, and open. It seems to me, my friends, that the ability to love is childlike. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself touched upon something similar 51 years earlier at Riverside, a year to the day before he was assassinated, as he spoke out against the evils of the Vietnam War. There, Brother Martin said, "This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is in reality a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all men." This oft misunderstood and misinterpreted concept, so readily dismissed by the Nietzsches of the world as a weak and cowardly force has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man. When I speak of love, I am not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. I am speaking of that force which all of the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is somehow the key that unlocks the door which leads to ultimate reality. He was not speaking of some sentimental and weak response. He was speaking of an uncompromising resolve. You don't have to think about it, and you most certainly don't have to like it. He was asserting the powerful reality of what it is to love, even one's enemy. Malcolm X supported this notion in his answer to a student question at the Harvard Law School Forum in December of 1964. There, Brother Malcolm said, "And then we should not take sides either way. We should reserve political action for the situation at hand, in no way identifying with either political party, the Democrats or the Republicans, or selling ourselves to either party. We should take political action for the good of human beings. That will eliminate the injustices." Love is the creative force that propels us past the divisiveness of fear, self-interest, and ideology towards transforming moments of possibility. It necessarily concerns us with the welfare of others, and it works tirelessly against the injustices that surround, of which there are many. It has been a difficult time for our community, for our country, for the world. I am not here to name ills, but I am here to assure you, bright citizens of tomorrow, class of 2018, that you are poised to confront them. Walk forth from these benches, committed to keeping a sustained sense of wonder, an actively listening and otherwise open heart, a loving resolve, inner peace, and a beginner's mind. Do not allow said ills to advance you beyond your years, excusing you from your obligation to love. Claim your birthright. Be childlike.